And good morning to everybody who's joining the Augustan Society's lecture series. I'm Rod Fleck. I'm the chairman of the society. Dame Jessica Hartwell is the work um, guru of everything in the society, I'll argue. And
Know about
we
that.
and we are very, very fortunate to have you join us today. The Augustan Society was founded in 1957. It is international in its origins. It focuses on chivalry, genealogy, heraldry, nobility, and history. And we are been doing a lecture series on and off for I'm going to say about a year and a half, and you'll see some earlier ones. We have a YouTube channel with these get posted to. There's a breadth of topics there that I think folks will enjoy. We've been very blessed to have some remarkable speakers, and equally so today. And wanted to let everybody know that today's speaker, Samantha Matalone Cook, has an MAT, is a folklorist, historian, educator, and author and artist with decades of experience in history, humanities, art education, and program development. She's a constant writer. She loves looking at the role of history and the way people interact with history and folklore. She's the author of The History Compass, a guide to historical thinking, research, and writing, a secondary school textbook designed to build college-level knowledge and skills. She's been involved with project-based learning, creating modern education of curiosity, innovation, and impact, as well as and what is magic, an unofficial exploration of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. My wife should be listening this then. Um, she is a Hufflepuff that always is loving her fandom. So uh, she's director for Curiosity Hacked, a nonprofit hackerspace for kids and families. So she's got a gambit there. She has a bachelor's in humanities with emphasis in medieval history and archaeology, and an MAT from George Washington Graduate School of Education and Human Development, specialized in museum education. Uh, Lives in Oregon and is folklore and public culture at the University of Oregon. She research interests include mythic art, medieval material culture, social memory, migration activism, feminism, and eco-critical theory. Uh, Lives down south of where I am, in Portland, Oregon, with her family, dogs, and her books. And we are very lucky to have her participate. Dame Jessica Hartwell worked with Sam. They are good friends, and we're grateful for the bond of friendship that brought Samantha to us. So, ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I love that you included my books in my family. That's absolutely true. Um, every time we move, it's a thing. Um, so thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen in a second here. In terms of my introduction, that is all true. Hold on here. Let me get this up and running. All right, does that look good to everybody?
Looks good.
Great. Um, I am indeed working at the University of Oregon on a more specialized, really a continuing and expanding of folklore and public culture. The focus of my current research is actually on Dartmoor and the adjacent regions in Devon County, which is in the southwest of England. And I'm looking specifically at how the mythic arts are uniquely embodied by the community through intersections of heritage and social memory and environment, and how there's this collective vision of restoring and restoring, right, through folklore and myth, the land, and using service and enchantment to do so. And by such, creating these new strategies to cope and navigate social and environmental issues. I'm really interested also in how the historic mythic motifs are being used and revived really in these modern contexts, and how myth is being used as sort of a field guide, which is kind of crossing the border into natural sciences, which I'm really enjoying. So if you have questions about that, I can answer them at the end. But for now, let's get started. So in my description, I say this: throughout time and place, heraldic achievements have incorporated oral and written folklore into visual iconography and symbolism. From antiquity to the Middle Ages to contemporary design, folklore and mythology were applied intentionally and strategically to tell an intelligible narrative of history, heritage, identity, accomplishments, principles, and aspirations. In some cases, heraldic achievements also created new stories and provocations, resulting in historical myth, some of which are examined and discussed to this day. So in this session today, we're going to illustrate how to understand heraldic achievements and their legacy. Heraldry demands literacy, not just in graphic elements that comprise the design, but in the folklore that often serves as the foundation for their meaning. Using several examples of heraldic achievements to explore the role of folklore's communication and performance, this session is going to cover the impact of interpretation and historiography, as well as discuss several examples of historical myth provoked by heraldry and how misunderstandings or altered narratives affect both perception of historical figures and collective social identity. I thought this was a great image to start with. This image is a page in the tournament book commissioned by King Rene of Anjou, Sicily. The tournament was actually in 1446, but the book itself was assembled and illustrated in the 1470s. This is an amazing book, and what I love the most about it is that it concerns itself with the customs and ceremony around the tournament more than the results of the tournament itself. For example, this image shows one of the roles ladies were expected to play at the tournament. According to the king, they should be led past the helmets of participants. If any of the wearers of said helmets were overheard to make a disparaging or lewd remark about the women, a lady would touch the helmet and call him out, and he would be brought to account. And those whose helmets were left untouched would be able to take part in the dancing and revelry of the evening. A practice maybe we should bring back. I'm just saying. I want you to look at that and think about this image for, during your time. We're going to come back to this image, but what struck me is all the folkloric elements that are in it. And we'll talk about it a little bit later once we kind of go through the folkloric elements. But I wanted to bring this image up first and then come back to it because it's so visually beautiful and impactful. So what is folklore? This is a really complex and enormous topic. And so today will be a very basic introduction to the relationship between folklore and heraldry and the stories they tell. But I did want to start to briefly examine the term folklore, which can be and often is understood or misunderstood publicly in a variety of ways. So simply put, folklore is traditional beliefs, customs, stories, and practices that are transferred primarily informally, but not always. They can be carried on formally through generations in a community. I would add that I see folklore as a living, breathing, evolving practice of cultural knowledge, belief, and expression. It's constantly changing and moving and adapting. And as you can imagine, the academic field of folklore is interdisciplinary and complex. And while I won't cover the dense history and theory of folklore in this lecture, I do think it's helpful to explore the three broad genres of folklore, which are verbal lore, material lore, and customary lore. So verbal lore are the things we say. So legends, tales, memories, myths, songs, jokes, rhymes, anything like that. Material lore is the things we make. So this would be art, quilts, tattoos even, any kind of things that we make, pottery. Customary lore is the things that we do. So this would be rituals, beliefs, festivals, weddings, funerals, ceremonies, celebrations. And I think that many might find it easier to understand the wide scope of folklore when put into this context. And I know that this audience may be fairly knowledgeable about the subject, but so we're on the same page, let's define heraldry as the design, display, use, regulation, and study of armorial insignia or hereditary symbols. It's a system that specifically identifies and distinguishes individuals, families, and organizations through visual language. So that's the definitions that I am using today. So when we put the two together, one of the many reasons heraldry has intrigued me for years is that the topic essentially covers all three of these genres. In verbal lore, heraldry contains both cultural and personal myths and legends, as well as harnesses the power of visual symbolism to create new stories. Material lore, images of coats and arms are created to express these stories, and while there are often institutional standardization, there is also a very vernacular or localized approach that remains in the design. And then customary lore. Heraldry undoubtedly is a performance, and one that often includes ritualistic aspects, from the making of images to the beliefs expressed by those images. Heraldry also reflects what folklore scholar Elliot Oring calls attributes. So heraldry is traditional in that it is concerned with both continuity and change. Symbolism and style, beliefs and material application, all have been maintained over time while often adapting to fit present needs and situations. Heraldry is aesthetic, maintaining a standard of excellence by which images are critiqued with a system for perfecting skill in making visual representations and a general method of evaluation whether or not it was successful. Heraldry is both common and marginal. It's common, it's a basic kind of human expression, part of the quotidian experience, in that the symbolism, myths, and aesthetics reflect the immediate time and place of an individual or a group as much as the broader society or inherited values and practices they may be working with. But heraldry is also marginal in that with that, the common experience of time and place, it has a very specific and even explicit relationship to power and privilege. For example, for much of European history, heraldry was an exclusive right of nobility and monarchy. In other words, it's a small percentage of any given culture that is involved in the heraldic system. That said, many more are impacted, which makes heraldry communal and ideological. It reflects and expresses and strengthens group identity and ideology, the fundamental beliefs of a system and practice that unites all those that participate in it. At times, it supports dominant ideas, but other times it can be and has been used to challenge hegemonic notions. Sometimes this challenge comes from heraldry being deeply personal. It's a way of communicating with others and building a distinct narrative of values and legacy and even strategy. I also want to highlight and underline that heraldry is an artistic practice which uses various mediums and methods and is used on a diverse range of conduits, from manuscripts to stained glass to military paraphernalia. The actual designing and creating of heraldic design is a folkloric practice as much as the images and symbolism that it contains. So I'll end this section with this quote. So folklore is an essential area of study because, as folklorist William Wilson articulates, surely no other discipline is more concerned with linking us to the cultural heritage from the past than folklore. No other discipline is more concerned with revealing the interrelationships of different cultural expressions than is folklore. And no other discipline is so concerned with discovering what it is to be human. It is this attempt to discover the basis of our common humanity and the imperatives of our human existence that puts folklore study at the very center of humanistic study. And it is that importance, what he's saying there, when combined with the topic of heraldry, that to me, that offers a unique perspective on how layered and human heraldry really is. So with all this in mind, we're going to take a look at some examples of folkloric communication in heraldic device. Oh. So I want to start by saying that just as I don't have time to cover the history of folklore, nor will I be able to outline the extensive past of heraldry, which I would argue begins in the ancient period, though not established as a system till the Middle Ages, and then continues to this day. I understand that the Augustan Society is building a whole course on the history of heraldry, and I really encourage you to email them about that opportunity because it looks amazing. But don't fear, a deep knowledge of the history of heraldry nor folklore is not required, and to understand and consider the examples that we're going to be looking at today. So heraldry, as noted before, is fundamentally a form of communication. It certainly was and is used for identification and the verification of rights and honors, but it is also a narrative. It's storytelling controlled by the symbols integrated into the designs, which had to be intelligible to its audience and often follow strict adherence to institutional standards, depending on time and place. But these designs could also control their own narrative by the strategic use of visual language. Therefore, heraldic literacy was both high culture, sanctioned and set by the ruling body, and vernacular or folk culture, meaning incorporating the local myth and customs of the time and place. It's this literacy that changes heraldic achievements from a combination of imagery into an expression of identity, a story to be read, and a claim to heritage. By definition, heraldic achievements are defined by the complete depiction of all the heraldic components. So the shield, the crest, helm, torse, supporters, mantling, motto, and even the battle cry. This often gets confused with the term coat of arms, which is technically the garment or the coat that is embroidered with the shield, but sometimes including parts of the larger achievement. In addition, achievements only belong to one family, while some of its other components may be used by others like the crest. And I wanted to include this information because I felt it was important to understanding the folkloric elements that I'm going to be talking about. So I found these two nice little charts here. This may be something you're already familiar with. So first, I thought we'd look at some common folkloric motifs that are used in heraldic achievements. And the first elements often noticed are color. It's dependent on time and place again, though some colors have universal interpretations. Many of the colors are also ruled by a planet, and their meaning is often associated by their placement on the design. Some colors are chosen based on myth and lore that has been integrated, such as red, white, and black, for which there's growing evidence that these were the dominant colors used routinely in art and decoration, even when other colors were widely available. While these colors may make you think immediately of Snow White, they have been used worldwide for thousands of years, and the combination of these three colors, black, white, and red, each with their own culture-bound meaning, seems to be used universally and be universally attractive, most likely due to color science as much as color symbolism. In European, meaning the way that we see the colors through our eyes and looking at the cones, that kind of science. In European symbolism, red usually represents loyalty and a commitment to serving one's homeland. Black represents constancy, grief, prudence, and intelligence. White represents sincerity, wisdom, and joy, moral chastity. I think it's important to note that the colors can also be chosen because of tradition or preference, but it's important to always be examining how the colors are in conversation with the rest of the elements. Here are two examples of military commanders during the 100 Years' War. Bertrand du Guesclin, there on the, he's in the center. He was known as the Eagle of Brittany, died in 1380. He was the Constable of France for King Charles V and was a very important military commander for the French. And there's a legend derived from a 13th century chanson de geste, the Roman d'Aquin, that his family claimed descent from the Quinn, the legendary Muslim king of Bougie in Africa, basically Viking in effect. That's a whole different story. Notice the double eagle for symmetry. Both, I have the shield there, and then I have a depiction down on the bottom center, symbolizing sovereignty and dominion and potentially dual rule within the scope of empire, which was really interesting because there were kind of multiple conflicts going on at that time. During the Breton Civil War, he captured and ransomed Sir Hugh Calveley. They're depicted on the right, died in 1394, who later returned the favor. They actually kind of captured each other and ransomed each other. There's a really fun kind of historical myth surrounding that. He fought all over Europe, mostly for the English, and ended up as governor of Calais. His canting arms, there on the right, which are designed to bear his name in a visual pun, because that, it relates to his name. Features three calves, passant sable, walking on with 1 foot raised. Calves often symbolize patience and self-sacrifice and are often used as a pun, such as in this case, or in another family name, like Metcalfe, as seen here in John Metcalfe's achievement, the Governor General of Canada, which was granted in 2005, there on the left. The basic design of 3 black calves on white is the coat of arms of Metcalfe, which makes a canting reference to his name. To make this design unique, the chevron was also added, indicating a propped up open book, which is appropriate because he was a writer and editor. And then a porcupine embellished holding leaves The porcupine is a Canadian animal, which was a fitting choice for him, and set with multiple quills, again, pointing to his writing and his motto, service and faith. Another element often used in heraldry is flora and fauna. For example, the lily, which came to represent the Virgin Mary, evolved into the fleur de lis and became a symbol of state sovereignty in France, symbolizing both beauty and political power. According to Greek mythology, the first lilies emerged from the drops of Hera's milk when she refused the infant Hercules, which also created the Milky Way. And then there's a Christian story of lilies erupting from the tears of Eve as she left the Garden of Eden. There are stories from all around the world, from really even in Japan with lilies, that employ them as a symbol of the afterlife or a redemption of sin or mourning, something related to that. There's an entire collection of French allegories and mythology that connect French royal power to the lily, most of which puts France under the direct protection of the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary. This also connects to other French design decisions, such as Charles VI winged deer there on the bottom left, which often represents both Jesus Christ and or the land itself, which is a really interesting. The stag often represents the forest or the care of the forest. It's an intentional nod towards an ecological perspective that I find really interesting. Another example of a popular animal in folklore is the stoat, or the ermine. This small animal has a vast range from North America to Eurasia, and therefore appears in a very diverse collection of legends and tales from all kinds of different cultures. Stoats can change the color of their coats with the seasons, which has its own role in folklore, and in the winter, particularly, its fur turns pure white with the exception of the tip of the tail, which remains black. It is this winter coat, often referred to as ermine, that is highly admired and even desired by humans. I want to focus, however, on the shield of the former Duchy of Brittany in France, there on the far right. It is derived from the design from Breton folklore. A pattern of ermine is a symbol of purity and moral conviction chosen by Anne de Bretagne, died 1514. The last independent ruler of Brittany. She was a powerhouse, and she had been married to two successive French kings. One day, the legend goes, she witnessed a stoat chased to the edge of a swamp full of mud, and rather than try to cross it, it chose to turn and face its attackers, and believed that the stoat would rather accept death than dirty its pure white coat, and was so moved that she saved the little animal and chose it to be the symbol of her dynasty, inspiring the motto, plutôt la mort que la souillure, death rather than defilement. Another example can be seen in the current royal achievements of the United Kingdom, there in the center. Both the version used in England and Scotland. England is the one on top. They both use ermine or stoat fur in the mantle. Notice the difference in the animals and their positions, by the way, which includes the unicorn, which brings us to mythical beasts. I would argue that this is likely the easiest category for which to define the role of folklore and heraldry. Mythical iconography can be abundantly found in heraldic achievements, sometimes chosen for its own symbolism and sometimes because it's connected to a larger myth or folktale that the design is using to create identity and legacy for the bearer themselves. Many of the mythical creatures found in heraldry were taken directly from bestiaries that were collected and illustrated. For example, wyverns, which are a two-legged, winged, dragon-like creature with a venomous tail and a ferocious demeanor, rather brutish, actually. Sometimes wyverns are in examples of many cities. A lot of cities use them. Like the current heraldic achievement for the city of Carlisle, which is there on the top right. Another city, Unterwurmbach in Bavaria, which is there on the bottom right, uses a wyvern over the local river. Cities will often tie mythical creatures in their folklore to the values or traits they wish others to see about their city. It's absolutely a strategy. In a position of importance and functionality, a wyvern sits atop the crest of the full achievement of Philip, Earl of Montgomery. They're kind of in the center to the left. And you can see the wyvern crest on top there. And then the wyvern maintained a local devotion as a position in historical myth based on this lineage, and then was later incorporated into the Montgomery Shire achievement that is there on the bottom right here. So this was the original Earl of Montgomery, and this one is the Montgomery Shire, how it was adapted. Another example is the Mermaid of Warsaw, which features on the city's achievement. Both images are there on the left. The current depiction is the commonly used image of a mythical sea creature that has the lower body of a fish and the upper body of a woman, but earlier versions, like shown in the 15th century, had the upper body of a woman, the legs of a bird, a fish or dragon tail, and scaly wings. The legend of the Warsaw Mermaid, or Syrinka in Polish, is a really interesting one. There's actually two versions. One version is the story that she originated from the Baltic Sea, where, according to some versions of this particular story, she had a twin sister, the famous Little Mermaid of Copenhagen. The Syrinka swam up the Vistula River until she was what now is Warsaw's Old Town, and there she saw some fishermen catching fish and decided to meddle with their nets and free the catch. The fishermen were angry at the meddlesome creature and tried to catch it, but once they saw the mermaid and heard her siren song, they could not harbor any hate for her any longer. Later, the mermaid was captured by a rich merchant who wanted to haul her off as some kind of prize, but the fishermen would not have it and freed her from the greedy man's clutches. The mermaid was thankful and promised to protect the fishermen and their homes from then on, and from that moment, she became the city's guardian and protector in times of need. So that's the first version of that story. And I'm going to tell you the second version as well, because I think this is such a beautiful illustration of how mythology works its way into heraldry. So a long time ago, there lived a powerful King Baltic who ruled his kingdom from an amber palace located at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. King Baltic had a beloved daughter who helped him rule his underwater kingdom. This beautiful mermaid was a Sirena. A Sirena had long blonde hair, blue eyes from the waist down, was covered with silvery scales to her tail. The bottom of the sea was her world, and it was the only world she knew. One day, she narrowly escaped being caught in some fish nets by swimming to shore, and when she lifted her head from the water, she saw the vista of a strange new world. "Where am I?" she asked the river Wisla, whose waters empty into the Baltic Sea. "In Poland," answered the river, "and if you want to find out more about this land, swim upstream with me." Being a good swimmer, Serena managed to do this. She saw things she never knew before, forest lands, animals, and birds, and finally she came to the plains of the Mazowsze, in the very heart of Poland. The people here had cleared the forest and built homes and lived fishing and hunting, and she fell in love with the brave tribe and decided to stay with them. In the evening, she would sing her nostalgic, haunting melodies for them. One day, a big hunt was held for the Mazovian prince. Chasing a reindeer, the prince got lost in the forest. He also lost his golden arrow with which he was hunting. Searching for it, he came to the banks of the Stula River. There, in amazement, he saw a white arm extending from the water, holding the arrow, and he became enchanted with Serena, the beautiful half-fish, half-woman creature. She smiled at him and, handing him the arrow, pointed in the direction he was to take. He soon came to a clearing in the forest where stood a small cottage, the home of the fisherman Barsh, his wife, and their twin sons. The wife gave him a good supper and asked him to stay overnight as a guest, and the next morning she refused any payment for the kindness. The prince was moved by their hospitality and their way of life. "If you like," said the fisherman Varsh, "we would be honored to have you come back and stay with us." And that's what he did. He returned with his people, and together they cleared more land and built a small settlement called Warszawa, which means the village of Mr. Varsh. Later on, it was changed to what we know now as Warsaw, and in 1596 it became the capital of Poland. So given all of this, you're probably already seeing that the sources of folkloric elements and their symbolism is varied and constantly changing, and that heraldry has a really deep relationship with the land, as it often has a vested interest and in both ownership in and of, or at least some of, the land, as well as loyalty and a sense of belonging to it. Motifs of flora and fauna, like boars and lions or oaks and cedars, were often chosen specifically to represent that environment and sentimental bond. The land also inspires specific local myth, like the Arthurian legends, that have been consistently incorporated into heraldic imagery. This also extends into the heritage of the land. For example, Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, Norse, Greek, Roman mythology all impacted the folklore and therefore symbolism used in England, while the incredible multicultural experience of the island of Sicily resulted in a very diverse employment of images and symbols from Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. This segues into how travel and migration played a role in symbolism. Motifs were borrowed or served as inspiration from the global movement of people and things and ideas by the Crusades and by the Silk Road and the spice routes. And I've always thought of heraldic achievements as a witness to these origins as much as a messenger and guide to their meaning. And I wanted to pull up a couple of, there's a map of the trade routes that expanded during the 11th and 12th centuries there. And there's a really interesting project going on that is basically mapping the new Silk Road, which I will make sure Jessica has a link to, because I think many of you would be interested in it. But I wanted you to also know these style motifs. So on the bottom left, there is a 16th century Chinese textile featuring double-headed eagles made specifically for the Iberian Peninsula market. And I just want you to notice how that design so beautifully mimics some of the shields that we are seeing today. There is above right, there's a 3rd century Parthian door lintel with lion griffith and a vase with a lotus leaf. Again, a design that absolutely could have inspired heraldic design. And then on the top left, the Palatine Chapel in Sicily. This is a Macarnus ceiling tile. If you've never seen pictures of the ceiling, it's incredible. It's these little wood tiles that are all hand painted individually. But this one is a painting of a man battling a dragon. It's possibly St. George and the Dragon, which often shows up in heraldic achievements as well. The first account that we have of St. George and the Dragon is 11th century, but it does have pre-Christian origins, so the concept of it was already circulating around. And these are all, these are just, 3 examples of designs that have traveled over this migration that I'm talking about and would have influenced and inspired design. So one of the ways we can view heraldry, especially in the context of folklore, is as a performance. Performance is a mode of communicative behavior, often framed in a particularly aesthetic and heightened way and put on display for an audience. As such, it both exists as a creation of the performers or the artists, as much as an action accountable to and in relationship with its audience. It's responsive, right? It's reflexive. Performative takes this concept a bit further to mark the nature of the performance and the characterization of something or someone by its performance. And so again, that reflexivity of how are we responding to what we're seeing and how is it responding to us. Heraldry is a mode of communication that is framed in a specific aesthetic way and designed for others as much as it is for oneself. And one of the ways heraldry performs is through the communication of meaning via iconography and symbolism. It's a visual language. It's meant to be read and considered and sometimes even answered. This language narrates cultural values, challenges, aspirations, traditions, practices that offer insight both at the time the images were created and in the present day. Today, I want to touch on an example that directly connects to the modern state of the world and illustrates the lasting impact of both folklore and heritage, which is not always positive. So the wild man, sometimes the wild woman, feature in folk traditions around the world, but this example is a European one. In some versions, wild folk are symbolic of our connection with the natural world. but in others, they resembled humans, but often hairier, and they walked on all fours. They were thought to inhabit the forests and mountains in contrast with the idea of civilization and associated with the Roman monstrous races, living on the fringes of the known world, the other, and increasingly used to dehumanize non-Europeans, especially when we get to the indigenous people of the Americas. Wild folk and the Moor's head were common tropes in European heraldic imagery. Wild folk often bore a patron's coat of arms, and the Moor's head was frequently integrated in family crest, as seen in this example of a 15th or 16th century Flemish, possibly French, tapestry. The pejorative term Moor was invented to describe Muslims who Europeans were fighting against in the Holy Wars. Eventually, they began to be incorporated into heraldic imagery, and I've included two examples. One of a Black woman holding a lily, a symbol we've already talked about, that adorned the crest of the Kirchberg family from at least 1263, maybe earlier. The other is an achievement of the von Plotho family, an ancient German noble family from northeast Germany. These figures were caricatures with dark skin and exaggerated features meant to demonize and racially other. And as a result, this heraldry underwrote the colonialism, the enslavement, and the global trade of Africans and indigenous peoples of the Americas, the myths of white supremacy, and the consequences that we are still facing to this day. Another way that heraldry performs is by expressing identity through personal, political, and social means, and usually it's all three. It was also used to navigate one's position in society and negotiate for any benefits, such as land or royal favor. Folklore could help by elevating the narrative to align with the mythic and/or the righteous. So my first example is there on the right. It's Richard II and the White Hart. All over England, in almost every city, town, and village, there is a pub or an inn that contains the White Hart in its name. Anybody who's been there will know I'm telling the truth. The White Hart was the personal badge of Richard II, a chained white hart or deer decked in pearls and wearing a golden crown. Richard, who wanted to distance himself from the heroic military reputation of his father, the Black Prince, and even his grandfather, turned to alchemy and the occult to create a more pious ideal of kingship. Inspired by the Stele Alchemae, he chose the beautiful and mysterious fugitive stag and the round white perfect pearl as his personal emblem and distributed it among his followers, and then integrated it into his heraldic devices. Unfortunately, his use of alchemy and his willingness to use power and the imagery that was produced by that power and what it represented against anyone who criticized or opposed him was also his downfall. So there we are. I also wanted to talk about Simon de Montfort, who is a particular of interest to me. I actually did my first thesis on Simon de Montfort. In almost every depiction of the 13th century shield of Simon de Montfort, who died in 1265, he was the 6th Earl of Leicester, the Lord High Steward of England, and the associate confidant and brother-in-law to King Henry III. And so in almost every depiction that you see, his shield is shown as a white lion on a red ground. And in the cathedral at Chartres, there's a window depicting the same, which is likely where this mistake began. But the problem is that this depicts his father, Simon de Montfort, the great crusader in the Middle East and against the Albigensians or the Cathars. The timing of his Christian militant heroics and the collection of financial contributions for these windows really align perfectly for this honor and make much more sense than for his son, who was a revolutionary rebel in England and who would have no reason to be honored this way in a cathedral in France. As a younger son, he would have changed his shield, likely reversing the colors. And indeed, we do have proof. The famous St. Albans Chronicle Matthew Paris knew the Earl well and described it in his Chronica Majora. He even devoted an entire page to illustrating the shield of English nobility. And there's also an illustration of Simon's death and dismemberment at the Battle of Evesham, which shows the red lion rampant on a white ground next to the body of Simon de Montfort. You can see that there at the bottom. So why does this matter? Well, From a historian's point of view, we could point to the objective and obligation for accuracy. We could also highlight how confusing the shield muddles the historical record and therefore social memory we have for these historical figures. Simon de Montfort the son led a revolution, the Second Barons' War, becoming the de facto ruler for a time and playing a major role in England's constitutional development. He is considered to be, by many, the father of modern parliamentary democracy, and he has a memorial near Evesham, a statue, as well as many other honors, university, bridges, schools, street names, you name it. And there is a relief of him in the United States House of Representatives, seen there on the bottom left, as well as a statue outside the county courthouse in Cleveland, Ohio, which I've not been able to figure out yet how that decision was made. On a personal level, while Simon would have differentiated his shield from his father's while keeping the elements as was custom, the symbolism of what he did choose is intentional. If we examine the heraldic elements, the white ground is a symbol of sincerity, wisdom, joy, and moral chastity. The red symbolizes loyalty, military prowess, and devotion to one's homeland. The lion is a European lion, like a cougar or a mountain lion, which symbolizes courage, strength, and nobility and justice. It is a lion rampant, symbolizing benevolence. This specific combination, even with just 3 elements, tells a really specific story. We have 2 myths here, right? The historical and the personal. The historical myth is one that has been built around Simon de Montfort as a man who defied a king to limit the power of the monarchy and include the voices of elected representatives around the country. Not to say that he was all virtue. He was not. For example, he was very personally and politically anti-Semitic. Initially, after his death, a miracle cult formed around him, which is another form of folklore. Even after the king shut it down, pilgrimages still continued to this site, and they wore his shield. His name and image, including his shield, are still invoked in the name of representative government. His father was a hero of crusade, a warrior who fought against heretics in the Middle East and in southern France. And mixing the 2 identities is a misinterpretation of both the meaning of the heraldic composition and of the men who bore each design. And so one of the most interesting aspects of both of these stories and the heraldic images that accompany them, as well as the ones on the previous slide from that, is that the impact of evolving interpretation and historiography based on new evidence and perspectives, as well as progressive theory, profoundly affects both the perception of historical figures and the way we see our collective social identity. So finally, heraldry performs through other art forms in artistic and literary creations that sometimes blur the line between fact and fiction. Inspired by the Arthurian legends, there's a long-standing tradition of creating heraldic achievements for King Arthur, as well as the Knights of the Round Table. Sometimes the designs were chosen for their symbolism, and other times they were created to make a claim on heritage or even descendants from the noble kings and his knights. And there is a long historical tradition of that. So you can see a couple of images there on the bottom left, Chevalier's Chachon Lancelot, which is a 15th century manuscript held in Paris, and then a tapestry by William Morris and Edward Burne-Jones, The Arming and Departure of the Knights. And you can see that each one has a different take on the shields. Another example is J.R. Tolkien's work. He created the incredible world of Middle-earth, a mythology for his homeland, and he employs with great skill many symbols and thematic visual elements for identification, claims of heritage or loyalty, and even as a plot device. In terms of heraldry, some designs he actually illustrated, while others are described in various states of detail within the text. So, for example, I have 3 examples there on the top left. In Lord of the Rings, he describes the imagery for the heirs of Elendil. There be flowered a white tree, and that was for Gondor, but 7 stars were about it, and a high crown above it. And for the house of Urla, the Rohirrim, the device of the white horse upon green field was used by the kings of Rohan. Quote, the running horse, white upon green, that was the emblem of the house of Url. Thus, during the War of the Ring, Gulaf carried Theoden's banner, white horse upon a field of green, and his heir, Aramir will use it in times of peace thereafter. Others, however, he did illustrate, such as for many of the elves, including Indril Celebrimbor. The original manuscript there, it's the third one in, the one that looks kind of like a flower. The original manuscript includes several notes, cornflower, the cornflower pattern, circular pattern. The design can be seen as 12 blue flowers upon a black field or 12 petals upon a blue field, according to the rules of elven heraldry. So many points reaching the outer rim signify her rank as a daughter of the king. So there's lots and lots of evidence for that particular image. And then finally on the far right, I could not help adding Ulrich von Liechtenstein, who was a 13th century knight and poet who wrote about leading a virtuous courtly life. His poetic autobiography, which I would categorize as folklore, describes great quests in which he defeats all comers in honor of his lady love, which happened to inspire. He was a real knight, and a news story using his name was created in the 2001 cult classic film A Knight's Tale, in which William Thatcher assumes the name of Ulrich von Liechtenstein, although he was from Gelderland. His assumed heraldic achievement accompanies his patent of nobility, forged by a Geoffrey Chaucer himself, a man who knows his way around heraldry and folklore, and apparently in this film anyway, gambling and hyping up a crowd. But I found it fascinating that this folklore inspired that. Geoffrey Chaucer's work, especially his tale of the Knight's Tale, all inspired this film. And it's a fantastic film if you haven't seen it. My only wish is that they had actually put in a little nod to the original Ulrich von Liechtenstein in the heraldic achievement. So finally, I thought we'd take a quick look at modern heraldic expressions. I'm particularly interested in how visual language and folklore intertwine, and even more specifically, how historic iconography is reused and reinterpreted in new ways to address contemporary social and environmental issues. One example is Counterprint's volume on modern heraldry, which is a profusely illustrated guide to more than 350 trademarks based on heraldic symbology from all around the world. There's actually a volume 2 as well, I think. I was also intrigued by this achievement of the Mescalero Apache tribe of New Mexico. It was devised by the England's College of Arms in 1986, which I'm still researching to find more information on, but it still felt like it was worth sharing because it's clearly full of folkloric motifs. And I also realized that there is only a fraction of us who consider 1986 to be modern, but it is. There is also a whole new generation of heraldic artists creating bespoke achievements, like Tanya Cunningham's one there on the right. It's not a restricted practice anymore, and in addition, many cities and families with old heraldic traditions are revising their designs to reflect contemporary values and aspirations. So I'm curious, maybe we can discuss a little bit, what stories do you think heraldry will tell next? What is the future of this form? Before I leave the slideshow and take questions, I just want to visit that first image once again that I showed you at the very beginning. I want you to look carefully and see all the folkloric expressions and practices relating to heraldry in just this one painting. Where is the verbal and material or customary lore? How does the traditional, the aesthetic, the common, the marginal, the communal, the ideological, the personal, how do they play a role in the success of the heraldic achievements depicted here in the ceremony that is surrounding them in this picture? Some of the things that I noticed was the ritual, right? This parade, right, of women who go around. There's a very specific ceremony, and ritual in folkloric terms must lead to transformation, and indeed it does. It by touching or not touching the helmets, right, the knights are transformed into virtuous or not. That's one of the things I noticed. Also, the display of the different heraldic elements are just absolutely beautiful. And I'm curious to see, I could go on and on about that, but I'm curious to see what else you might have picked up on. So thank you so much for being here today. And if you'd like to keep in touch or follow my work, my information is on the bottom screen. And now I look forward to your questions or having a little discussion about what we've just talked about.
Well, thank you, Samantha. That was a great presentation, and it'll be interesting to see what questions we have. So I'll open it up and see if I can watch if people have questions, raise their hand, and we can do that. Got about 10, 12 minutes here, so um, I do like the question on modern interpretations and where some of the modern designs are going. I think that was a fascinating little side addition to the presentation. I see Matthew. So Matthew, ask you to unmute and go ahead with your question.
Hi, yeah. First of all, thank you for that wonderful talk. It was I mean, I'm a lifelong heraldry aficionado, and so it was easy to win me over. And thank you for the informative talk. I think I think in terms of uh, where it's going. I think it's stronger now in some respects than it's certainly as strong as it's been since the medieval period when it first came about, more or less as symbols to be seen easily on the battlefield, and some of these elements that harken back to personal meaning and folklore. I think those are even more present perhaps now. I think now you see a real growth on that when people want to represent in their personal heraldry some of those aspects. It's just as my without speaking too much of myself, but my own coat of arms, a portion of which you can see there has a hand in it. It's the only charge in the coat of arms, and it has deep meaning to it. I have some Irish ancestry. My fraternal side, I have Jewish ancestry on my maternal side, and so the hand represents both Lulamadda from the Tuatha De Danann legends, who had the long the Lu of the long hand, the warrior who killed his grandfather Baelor, of the evil eye, and so it has elements of Irish folklore, deep meaning, that's meaningful to myself as somebody of Irish ancestry, and also warding off the evil eye in terms of the hand of the Hamsa hand, or hand of Miriam, sometimes it's called, in the Jewish tradition and Middle East traditions. So I think these elements of folklore are, they're not dead. I think they're even more apparent, and these can be seen in many coats of arms, either assumed or granted from heraldic authorities today. So that's my 2 cents, is that it's going to it's expanding, and it will keep expanding, and I'm all for that. So
Yeah, thank you for that. I have to agree with you that I think folklore is becoming more alive than ever, and the integration of it into personal expression is indeed growing. I think in some ways, I'm noticing that people are starting to really resonate and seek out this visual language as opposed to, verbal. Um, that sometimes the visual language makes more sense, is more meaningful, expresses what it is that they're feeling and desiring and experiencing more. And so there seems to be a great attraction to becoming literate in that language. Yeah,
May I make a couple of comments?
Go
sure.
ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture or talk. Um, I have an advantage because I'm at the other end of the country you're talking about, straight across. I do lectures, talks, social history for ourselves here and for Ventura and Santa Barbara, who we sort of have links with. Some of the lectures we've done took a different context to yours, which I thought was absolutely great to do, folklore and history. But I pick up the little things that you saw on the shield of the
Yes.
soldier, three, three motifs. Lots of the livery companies in England have three motifs in their livery, and of course we've written about those, what livery company they represent, the history behind them. So that was quite interesting to immediately see somebody else, but with a three motive display. And the other thing that I presented, which is more your folklore, is ley lines. Have you done any work on ley lines?
I wouldn't say I've done work on them. I'm familiar with
Yeah.
ley lines, and they end up intersecting in my work quite a bit. Especially when I'm working with mythic artists, right? In Southwest England, ley lines play kind of a big role for many of them in how they are, the composition of their work and how they're approaching their work. I'm glad that you mentioned the numbers though, because I almost added another slide, but I'm like, oh, how many slides? I'm already at time. Because number symbology plays a huge role, right? And the number three, absolutely. Three is not the only number, right, that has meaning,
No.
but many, especially in European folk tales and fairy tales, three shows up. Three shows up in Christian mythology quite a bit.
Yeah.
Whereas when we talk about indigenous tales, I'm noticing the number five quite a bit, for example. So when we think that it's just one kind of symbol, but it actually, you're right, merges with folklore in a way that's not just symbolizing one thing, but in fact is an umbrella for an entire set of meaning.
Anyway, thank you.
Oh, thank you for that comment.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments folks have? In the chat, we have Rose who points that appears that St. Louis Marie Montfort seems to be involved in teaching devotion to Mary. He was a missionary preaching the gospel. Presently, there are groups in Ohio that follows teaching. That might be a basis for that statue. And James notes one of the things I really like about, especially about Canadian heraldry, is its embrace of the modern. The best known example is probably the grant to the Right Honorable Julia Payette, who was an astronaut, and the helm used in the artwork as a classic spacesuit helmet. He gives a link on
That's
Wikipedia
amazing.
in the chat, and that's flipping awesome with music above it. That's awesome. So you'll have to look up that one, Samantha. It's a pretty good one.
I will
So
absolutely go look at that.
yeah, it'll make you go, oh, that's cool. I'm trying to see if we have any more questions.
Thank you, Rose, for I had just recently found it and I had not had time to dig into it because I am full of work at the moment.
All right. Well, it's coming up to that 10 a.m. hour. I want to say thank you to Samantha. What a great presentation. That was a lot in there that was just exciting and fun to see and engage with. See, we have other things. Oh, there is a note about society membership from Dame Jessica. If you're interested in Augustine Society membership, there's a link there, and you can do that online and become a member and help support things like this. We are grateful for those who are members of the society who participated and joined us this morning, but also to the general public. This is one of the hopes we had when we started these type of lectures on and off a few years back, and continue to grow them. We are working on November and December. I was going to ask Dame Jessica if she could say who we've got next. I know she's December. I just couldn't quickly remember who we had for November. And we're working already on 2026. So if you know someone or a topic that might be interested or interested in participating as a speaker, reach out to us. We'd love to consider it.
In November, we are actually bringing back a very popular event from this spring, which is an Augustine discussion salon. And we'll be inviting friends of the society, members, to come bring your interests, your topics, and have a ranging discussion with us about the society itself and our interests. At the last salon we did, we had great fun sharing what we're currently reading. And I think everybody went away with, 9 or 10 new recommendations to add to their to be read pile. So beware, books are a side effect of being involved with the society. But Rod and I will host that, and we're looking forward to just a more casual conversation with everyone. And then in December, I will be presenting. There's a touch of folklore in what I will be doing. I'm going to be talking about the origins of some of the holiday traditions that we take sort of for granted. The holly, the mistletoe, the red, white, and black, like Sam touched on. Um, so look forward to that. It's very fun.
All right. With that, folks, enjoy your Saturday. For those of you who are joining us from places where the day is partially over or maybe ending, hopefully you had a great day or have a great afternoon, and enjoy it. Enjoy it to the fullest. And thanks for everybody joining us. We really appreciate it. We had some 23 people participate in this, which is wonderful. And again, check out our YouTube link that was in the chat, but you can look up Augustan Society YouTube, and you'll find a list of prior presentations we have. And there's a range in there. We will keep wanting to expand that range with each offering. Take care. Have a great October. Bye-bye.